this particular time in human history, where we find that everything is, imagine just in 100 years, the kind of fantastic changes that have taken place in society in every country all over the world. Now we can see that so much, say, progress on the material world, say, bending nature to the will of our desires, using our intelligence, developing intelligence to the point now where, say, human abilities to produce and create are now we have things like the chip and all kinds of computers. And so that this kind of principle of intelligence has been developed. Now we find ourselves almost frightened by the creations, our own creations, like the story of Dr. Frankenstein. We've created a monster that's about ready to kill us. How do we stop the monster? Meditation, what we're doing here, is almost the exact opposite of the other, isn't it? We're not developing intelligence. We're not here to take an examination or to learn about Buddhism. We have to memorize lists and learn all about the Buddhist teaching, but put into practice. Actually, they turn inward, look at and observe the body, the mind, because Buddhist teachings are looking at an investigation of, in the seeing and understanding of our own self, our body and mind. Not like anatomy or physiology, is it, where we have someone else's body that we can look at, charts, diagrams of nervous systems and the blood, lymph and skeleton, all abstracted out for us to see, and somehow we look at a corpse that's being dissected or a chart of the human body, and then it's somehow abstracted from us. We can look at it quite objectively, and yet all those things are going on right within us, in our own bodies. We can read about psychology and about case histories of other people's neuroses and problems, and have theories about how people have the problems they do have, and yet not know anything about ourselves, how our own problems come and go, where they come from. So our knowledge has been extended into abstract thinking, into objects of sense. And now we're coming back to the very source of it, our own mind. So instead of seeking outwardly anymore, going out into the world or into outer space, we're coming back down to earth. And it's the symbols of the time, with the kind of rocket ships and this desire to progress at all costs, even to progress to the point of destroying, total destruction. Going to outer space, like taking all the kind of energy and wealth of the earth to make rocket ships that will take us to stars and planets far away from this one, where we probably wouldn't want to live anyway. And what they've discovered about Mars, it doesn't look like a place that any of us would want to stay on for very long. Jupiter, miserable looking place. The gases. Venus is incredibly hot. And even though it would be a wonder of human achievement, to be able to go and land on Venus, Mars, Jupiter, or whatever, it would be at the great expense of, say, maybe having to destroy, pollute our own planet. Now we do this also with ourselves, with our own body, isn't it? We seek that which is far away all the time, at the expense of the ruination, pollution of our own human body. And all the diseases, nervous diseases and physical ones that exist now, trying to destroy, not intentionally destroy, but use up the energy and the things of our own human body in order to get something far away. People wear themselves out trying to make a lot of money, don't they? Have nervous breakdowns, become alcoholics, drug addicts, and become really unhappy, miserable creatures who not really understanding what should be important in our lives. What is the purpose? What is the point of our human birth, our existence anyway? Why are we born? What happens when we die? And how should we live? The modern trends of the time now, they're beginning signs of change, aren't they? People are becoming interested in meditation, for one thing. 10 years ago, how many people in Switzerland had even heard the word, knew what it meant, or would have even bothered to spend 10 days doing this? Sitting, meditating, watching your breath. When you could be skiing, you could be going to the seaside, doing all kind of interesting things, pleasurable things. People now take holiday time to come to meditation retreats rather than going to the Côte d'Azur. Crazy, aren't they? The modern movements now, and there's a lot of talk about pollution, protesting against war, nuclear arms, using of the accumulation of nuclear weapons, ecology, interest in protecting the planet, and getting back to the mind again, trying to find the peace, the balance within oneself. So it's like the Buddha touching the earth, isn't it? We're coming back. We have to come back down to earth after all our efforts to get off it. It goes from one extreme to the other. Things seem to move in one direction, and then they get off balance. So we have to balance it with its opposite. It's been a time where the masculine principle has been emphasized, where the masculine qualities have been admired and extolled, and the feminine ones haven't. So we have feminist movements now. Women are beginning to protest. Because they begin to see that the masculinity carried to extreme leads to destruction, doesn't it? Masculine principle is taking us off the planet, but also taking us to destruction. So let's say the masculine principle, in this sense of rationality, logical thinking, just the the symbols of aggression and wanting to go into outer space at the expense of the earth, not wanting to be bothered with the coarseness and heaviness of earth, wanting to always go away, go into outer space. So this wanting to move, to go away. And then the feminine principles, they have the Mother Earth, taking care of the home, protecting the family. And now we think of the human family, don't we? We have to start expanding our consciousness to say it's a human family rather than just a nuclear family or a national family. We have to think in terms of protecting the human family and the earth. So the feminine values are becoming more appreciated. Masculines don't want to be bothered with the family so much. They just want to explore and find something new. Restless energy. You notice the difference in just meditation in a monastery between monks and nuns. The men are terribly restless creatures. I used to notice the nuns at Wat Nong Papong. They could sit all night, kind of just very, very patient. The monks would be getting up every going in, going out, moving around, restless energy. Now the balance between the two is what we're not preferring one over the other. Pointless to try to say, to say grasp one at the expense of the other, because that always leads to an imbalance. And an imbalance is always causes pain and suffering. So we're learning to balance again, to find our balance. Now, just in meditation, we're doing this inwardly, aren't we? Because we've also become, not only is the outer confusion of the time and the way the world is, the danger of destruction and war, but that is the result of our own imbalance within our minds, imbalance between the emotions, the intellect, and the body. Now we can condemn, we can talk about it, and we can theorize about what needs to be done, but the actual balancing is something we have to learn to practice, isn't it? We learn to, say when we're learning to walk, we learn to walk by practicing walking, don't we? We don't just, it just doesn't come to us. When a child is learning to walk, it has to make certain efforts, clumsy efforts, and then grasp hold of things, pull oneself up, fall down, until eventually the child learns to take one step, one balanced step, and then maybe two. So it's an actual determination in practice of walking that a child learns to walk. Same in meditation. It's through determination and constant effort, putting forth that amount of effort. Sometimes it's too much. We overextend ourselves and fall, or we don't put enough effort in, so we can't even lift ourselves up. We just lay there, mentally just sitting there, passive, putting any effort in, just drifting along. Or putting too much effort in, getting a headache. Mind will never calm down if there's too much or not enough. So that it's in our own use of of wisdom and awareness that we begin to see where the imbalances are. We have this ability to watch and witness things. Just being alert to when just observing, just investigating, say, passivity, depression, laziness, all these things, or aggression, impatience, restlessness. When you feel very restless and impatient with everything, annoyed and irritable, you can actually see that, can't you? You know that. Or if you're feeling dull and lazy and depressed and whatever, you know that. So in that knowing, you see, in actually witnessing and observing the way things are, then we know how to practice. Simple rules of practice, isn't it? The right amount of effort. What is that? You'd like maybe to have it measured with some kind of electronic instrument. But that still doesn't. Even if we know, according to a numerical amount of effort, it's only, just like in balance, even if you know the formula for balance in walking, it's only in actual experience of walking that you know balance. And you only know it when you're balanced. Then you know what being balanced is like. We call this being the knowing, being that which knows, being that which is awake, alert. And the worldly values we have is becoming something. Becoming this, becoming that. We talk about becoming enlightened, don't we? We practice meditation to become enlightened. Rather than being enlightened, practicing meditation by being enlightened. We come to meditation retreat to gain wisdom, rather than coming to a meditation retreat and being wise. See what I'm pointing to is a different attitude. A different attitude is necessary for meditation than the worldly ones, because the worldly values and ways of thinking that you've developed so far only block off and confuse and delude us. I don't know how many people meditate and yet they still cling to their conditioned attitudes from worldly life. So they can only kind of recondition themselves into some kind of meditators without ever being enlightened to it. They just become conditioned meditators. They learn all these techniques. They just go through the slow walking of the Burmese method for years. People get lifting, extending. touching. Grasp hold of some kind of technique. Get a lot of ideas, and they manage to maybe condition themselves into various techniques. But if the attitude is not right yet, they still, no matter any kind of meditation technique, is a mechanical thing, isn't it? You develop attachment, mental attachment, and have a lot of opinions and views about it. You have maybe certain kinds of insights, which if you have the wrong attitude, then even the insights you have, you misinterpret. You grasp hold of insights. The memories of having understood something once, you hold on to those memories. It's like the first year, as I was saying before, my first year meditating, I had all these insights. And then the following years, I kept trying to have the same insights again, because the memory was so pleasant. And yet, insight, you can only have it once, until it is. You can't have two of the same insights. Insight is just an immediate understanding in the moment. It's not a memory. And yet, we're so attached to conceptualizing, to having opinions and interpreting insight, that we make insight into something remembered rather than living insightfully. Being insightful in the present moment. So we think if we come to these retreats and do things over and over and over, we'll get insight, rather than insightfully meditating in the moment. They're being awake, aware in the moment. So the attitude is the most important thing, the right attitude. The first step on the Eightfold Path is called samadhi, which is right understanding, or could be actually right attitude. So another way of, say, using words to help us in our meditation is by changing just the verb tenses from becoming to being, seeing that any way of talking about attainment of states is also just a condition of mind, an opinion of you, rather than believing that you have attained anything or haven't attained anything. Any sense of me or mine, I am this, I am that, I am a Buddhist, or I am a Theravadan, or this. We start insightfully seeing that these are conditions of the mind, rather than believing these are some kind of allegiance we have to grasp and hold on to. There are meditation groups that people are incredibly attached to, like the Ubakin group. You meet any of them, Mr. Goenka's disciples. They're very attached to a lot of opinions about purity of tradition, and that you shouldn't go anywhere else. And none of their meditators, or very few that I've ever met, ever see that they're grasping hold of an opinion and a view. Because they have a lot of faith in the teacher, they never really insightfully see the attachment. So we bind ourselves to meditation techniques, teachers, religions, sects and cults, and kinds of things, thinking that if we do a certain kind of meditation technique over and over, it's going to enlighten us. We're told that if we keep doing this over and over and over and over, we'll become enlightened. So we believe it, because we trust what the teacher says. But that's still coming from an attitude of believing what the teacher says, rather than investigating, considering, and having the courage to find out yourself. Now, following a teacher is all right, as long as you, say, recognize any attachments that form. But believing that any tradition is pure, then that you shouldn't have anything to do with any other tradition. That's an opinion, isn't it? It's an opinion that one grasps. One is afraid of becoming impure. And there are various other opinions in the world that you shouldn't have any religious attachments, so you should just have nothing to do with any religion. Like Krishnamurti, People that follow Krishnamurti tend to believe that all religions are wrong. But that's also a belief, isn't it? Attachment to an opinion that religions are obstacles. Then you have some of the Tibetan schools. And they go on forever about developing bodhicitta, bodhisattvas. And people quite willingly accept all that, without question, believing in that kind of teaching. Now, I don't mean to be tearing down all the other teachers. I'm just pointing to the danger of attaching to things, to anything, to any opinion or view or tradition, which doesn't in any way mean you don't use technique or traditions or teachers. But the attitude I'm pointing to, an attitude that is one that helps you to find balance. This attitude of being the knowing, being awake, not the attitude of following a certain technique in order to become something. The attitude of going through you have to go through stages of this and that in order to become something at the end of it. Or the attitude that you don't have to do anything, or that any kind of practice is an obstacle. So that it's an immediate awareness in the present of any attitude, any opinion, any view as that, seeing it as it is. Some are right, some are fairly useful attitudes or opinions, some aren't. But they're only opinions. And opinions are helpful according to time and place and situations, but aren't ends in themselves. We begin to see opinions and views no longer as truths, but appropriate to time and place. They're subject to change. You don't hold, so you just grasp one opinion, one particular viewpoint, and apply it to all situations, then you become very insensitive, blind to anything that is different from that particular view or opinion. Now, this attitude of non-attachment, of being the knowing, being awake, being aware in the moment, just being able to remind yourself of that. Of course, the sense of ego will come in and say, I can't do it, it's too much, I need something else. But you can also be aware of your own feelings of discouragement, feelings of inability, or the feeling of it being impossible. From one moment to the next, just being patiently aware of the things that go through the mind, body. Be aware of our attachments to technique, opinions about Buddhism. It's really very amusing sometimes to hear people that have attached to various forms of Buddhism, and people attached to Theravada. When we first went to London 6 years ago, with Ajahn Chah was with me. woman came up to him and said, I am a disciple of Ajahn Mahabua, another famous Thai teacher. And I follow, he is my teacher. And I respect him, so I can't possibly come and study under you. Ajahn Mahabua is from the same kind of forest tradition as Ajahn Chah. A sense of devotion to a teacher. And that kind of allegiance, devotion, giving oneself to a teacher carried to absurdity. The fact that Ajahn Mahabua was in Thailand, far away, Ajahn Chah was in England, right near. So Ajahn Chah said, Ajahn Mahabua and I are disciples of the Buddha. He said, it doesn't matter which one you go to, disciples of the Buddha. So attachment to Theravada Buddhism. The Theravada is we can say, is the original way. Give it a kind of importance, say, the original form, the pure form of Buddhism. They have pure and original. That makes it sound really wonderful, doesn't it? We want something original, something pure. So, no, that's what I want to be, Theravadan Buddhist. Then the Mahayana comes along and says, we're the supreme. We're the great being, and those Theravadins are the lesser. When you have lesser, that's not so good, is it? Supreme, that's a lot. That's really wonderful, supreme. But lesser, they say, but the Theravadins are pure, but the Mahayanists are supreme. And then the Vajrayana, they're the ultimate. Got a headache, don't you? In Thailand, attachment to various teachers and methods and techniques. We have one group of some kind of monks will say, you have to do samatha practice, concentration practice, first. And you do the samatha until you gain the first jhana, and then you can go on to the other jhanas, but you have to get to this certain level of concentration, and then you can go to vipassana. Then there's the vipassana fanatics, who say, don't have anything to do with samatha, dangerous, deluding. So just have pure vipassana luan luan. Or pure, absolute vipassana, untainted with any samatha. So they even quibble and fight over samatha vipassana. And people will attach to one particular way of meditating and reject the other. It's bad. I know there was one teacher in Thailand I met, and samatha was like, he'd kind of sneer when he said it. One of the worst things he could say about any other teacher was that they taught samatha. It means don't have anything to do with them. And vipassana meant that was the real thing. That was the important thing. It was the vipassana. And yet these are just terms, and you're talking about things that you can witness and know, where concentration and awareness, they work together. They needn't be in conflict. You can say, Sila, Samadhi, Panya, the path is morality, concentration, wisdom. You start with morality, and then develop concentration from morality, and then wisdom comes. So it sounds like one thing leads to the other. So then, when we went to London, some Asian people came to Ajahn Chah and said, "What are you teaching samadhi, or concentration, to people who don't even have very good sila, aren't very moral?" I said, "Why are you teaching these immoral people samadhi?" Because in Thailand they think it's sila, morality first, concentration, then wisdom. So then Ajahn Chah said, he said, whichever one you start with, they all will eventually, all three will develop. He said, here in England, he said, if you start talking about morality, nobody will come and listen. So you talk about wisdom, and people want to hear all about that. But then from the practice of meditation, you eventually realize that you can't really do it unless you have some kind of moral discipline. So one goes to the other. You have to start from where you are, what you have, rather than from an ideal, that it has to be this first and that and that. When you start with vipassana or samatha, they actually, one will lead to the other. But yet our minds cling very much to this first, second, third, fourth, A, B, C, D. Really clunky mind, don't we? Big clunky mind. And kind of A, B, C, 1, 2, 3. Certain good qualities are exhibited in all these, like devotion, perseverance. Certainly one gains barami from practicing a meditation technique, even with the attitude of gain. Just doing something in a disciplined way can, we certainly receive benefits from it. So I'm not condemning even just loyal attachment to any religious teaching or meditation technique, but pointing to the obstacles that arise if one is moving toward enlightenment. And of course, as long as one is attached and doesn't know what attachment is, then there's no enlightenment, is there? As long as you believe that you are, as long as you believe the opinions about yourself in the world, you actually believe those are true, without recognizing that any opinion you have about yourself or anyone else or the world you live in is a conditioned thing, not the ultimate truth. And if you do not see attachment and really reflect on the suffering that comes from attachment, even all the baramis that you develop you'll not be enlightened. So like in the Tibetan where you develop all these different paramitas. Very good. Not saying it's wrong. But the attachment and the blinding, the believing in these opinions and views are what keep one from being enlightened through them. Now the way, say from because humanity is the way it is, we sometimes have to teach in stages. Because people are conditioned to understand stages, and you start here and go from this to this and this to that. And so, this is the way the mind operates. But now, say, as meditators, I'm not asking you to believe me, am I? This isn't doctrine, but a suggestion. Now, a suggestion I'm giving out because it has, if you consider it, not rather than just, now Ajahn Sumedho says you shouldn't cling to anything, have no tradition, no. But all I'm doing now is I'm not telling you what to do, but putting a suggestion into your mind to consider. So that you begin to look at attachment. It doesn't mean that you don't use the same meditation techniques you're using, but maybe to consider any kind of attachment, any opinions and views, any hopes, expectations, or disappointments with those, as you reflect on the results of what you're doing, on what you have done. Now, raising up this ability to reflect. Now, by this I mean being that knowing, like watching, listening. Investigating the Dhamma, call it Dhamma Vijaya, being able to reflect and consider the results of practice, rather than just go through the motions in kind of making meditation practice into just another habit of yours, to use technique, discipline and so forth, to learn from it, to observe the result. Like just what is 10 days of a meditation retreat? What does that do? What is the result so far? Would none like to go up?
I think so now, thank you. Sorry about that, Ajahn.
Would you like to go and...
I think I'll be all right. If I'm not, I'll go out.
Okay.
Thank you.
If your mind is quiet and peaceful, and like, what is it that during this time has allowed the mind to calm down? You consider rather than just attaching to tranquility itself or the calmness of the mind, or any insights that you have had during this retreat. When you have insight, you understand something that you haven't understood before. You know it from, as we say, from the guts, not from the brain. A kind of gut knowledge. You know it from down here in your very being. It's not just something you've read and understand from the intellect. No, insight in meditation is something you understand something, and even though if you say it out in words, it comes out just like something out of a book, but it's coming from actual having experienced the truth. And when insight is, it will happen suddenly, maybe in just small ways, or it can happen in kind of big ways. But then the danger after that is to attach to the memory of it. because in insight there's always a sense of joy or relief. Then we attach to that. We like the feeling. People will do one thing, like as you kind of ascetic practices. One can, say, refine consciousness through, say, lack of indulgence, lack of sensory stimulation. You get in one of these sensory deprivation tanks, or these sensory deprivation tanks where all your senses are kind of, the objects of sense are denied. You have no objects of sense. And then the mind actually drops into a state of calm because it's not being stimulated. We like that sense of calm, where actually the mind that's not stimulated is very nice. Very pleasant feeling, but we attach to that, wanting, desiring that state all the time. Now if we depend on sensory deprivation tanks, and we depend on depriving our senses of any kind of stimulation. So we can learn from that dependency upon mechanical things, on drugs or on just depriving ourselves, or special conditions, just like meditation retreats are special, aren't they? This isn't the way you live ordinarily. Just see that this is a special situation here. Not saying that special situations are wrong, but you're reflecting on live in the same house without talking to each other or a lot of interaction. Where for 10 days everything is kind of ordered, set up, and you just follow. You don't have to make decisions. You might create all kinds of problems during this time, but you actually, whether you feel like going to sit or walk, you can make problems out of that. But the advice was to just follow the schedule that was established. So you don't have to even have that dilemma in your mind. You just follow what is set up and keep to the precepts and watch. Well, there's not many opportunities in life where it's all so neatly set up for us, isn't it? Live in nice places like this, and for 10 days, 20 days, kind of ideal. And what is the result? So that ability to learn from experience by wise reflecting on it, noting the things that influence, how things affect your mind. Now, depriving your senses of a lot of unpleasant or excessive stimulation or exciting stimulation, when you leave here, you go back to the cities, you can also meditate. You see that, watch what happens to the mind when the mind's being, when there's a lot of demand and impingement on the senses. If you attach to the tranquility you get here, then you're going to find the sensory impingement, you're going to feel averse to it. Because one gets so attached to being peaceful and calm, really nice. Then one might feel resentful or averse to things that destroy that peace and calm. So when we attach to calm, to peacefulness, as what we want, when we desire that and attach to it, then we're going to feel very angry and annoyed, averse to excitement or unpleasant sensory impingement. So recognize this, note any aversion that arises. Because the aversion, it always comes from attachment, wanting something and then feeling annoyed when what you are attached to is taken away from you or interrupted. So you're wisely reflecting on on what happens to you in your life. Now we're learning about greed, hatred, delusion, the common human problems with these are greed, hatred, delusion. We recognize and say greed is the desire for something, wanting something. I recognize that your human body is a desire body, isn't it? The human body has fire in it. It has a fire element operating in it. So its nature is to consume things. In order for it to survive, you have to feed it. On an ideal level, you think, I hate greed. And I'm ashamed of the greed I have for food. Or maybe sexual desire. You don't want any of that either. Disgusting. If you're attached to the idea of not being greedy or lustful or anything, then on the ideal level, then these natural forces that go through that your body might upset you. You feel averse to greed because you've taken a position against greed, rather than, say, understanding the needs of the body, reflecting that the body is a desire body. It has the fire element. When the fire goes out of the body, it's called a corpse, isn't it? When the fire element goes out of a human body, it's called a corpse, a dead body. So as long as the fire element's operating in these bodies, then there's going to be these very kind of natural desires operating through it. Desire for food, drink, sexual desire. These are natural kind of things. They're not self. They're not any personal failure or disgusting kind of qualities of humanity, of you, any kind of great problem with you. But the wisdom is to recognize these as they are, rather than attaching to them with fascination, exaggerating them, or trying to annihilate them with aversion, disgust, repression. So we begin to understand just what is needed for, say, maintenance of the body. So how much food it does need, rather than just, say, following our greed for food, just so every time we want something to eat, we start eating. That's one extreme, isn't it? Or thinking, I'm such a greedy person, I'm not going to eat anything, starve to death. That's the other extreme. But we can wisely eat and provide the body with what it needs for it to live its life, its span, to carry through its span. In our wisdom, we allow this formation, this physical formation, to carry through, if we take care of it properly, respect it properly, carry on to its natural span until it's time for it to die. We aren't trying to make it die sooner than, because we think, such a disgusting thing, I wish it would just die off right away. Then suicide would be the way to do it, isn't it? Why bother spend 10 days and we just slit our throats at the beginning? Get it all over with. But that's not wisdom, is it? You're not getting any wisdom. You're coming from an opinion, a prejudice, aversion, saying, I don't like my greedy body, so I'm going to end it, cut it off. No wisdom in that. The same with sexual desire. This is a natural impulse. The bodies, human bodies, are one of their functions is procreation. So then you wisely reflect. Like for monks, we're celibate, so we do not procreate. And so this is what we choose, how we choose to live. But still, a sexual desire operates through these physical formations. But it's something that we refrain from following in active ways. So that is mindfulness, isn't it? It's not repression of sexual desire or disgust for it, fear of it, but it's using a discipline to refrain from just being caught up in following sexual impulses all the time. Like eating too much, or just with no kind of ability to understand it if we just follow every desire. So say in the brahmacharyan life, we have no active kind of sexual life whatsoever. But sexuality still, the body is still a sexual body. But because sex is not necessary for survival, we refrain from any intentional sexual activity. Now the result of that, say, from life of celibacy is very peaceful mind, because sexuality is very exciting, isn't it? Sex is quite exciting. Celibacy isn't. Celibacy isn't exciting, but it's peaceful. So you begin to appreciate peacefulness rather than seeking excitement. Now, as lay people, then you must come to terms with your own use of sexuality rather than just a habit, a heedless habit, or a repression, aversion to it, or just blind indulgence, misuse of it, exploitation, taking advantage of others. You begin to wisely consider what the point of it is, how to use it properly, when it is appropriate, when it isn't, according to what kind of life you want to live. But it's not from a position of being against it or for it, but wisely considering the forces of nature that you have to exist with, the kind of life that you have to live if you're married or single or whatever, how to live in a way that is conducive towards, say, self-respect, towards wisdom, understanding things properly, learning how to live wisely with the forces of nature, rather than just exploiting them or destroying them. So that wisdom is something that we use in just the conditions of life as we have to live, the conditions that we have to live with. You see, we're not becoming Puritans, are we? Saying that sexuality is disgusting, shouldn't do it. Nor are we saying that it's an absolute necessity, you can't possibly get anywhere unless you do it. Unless you have an active sex life. One learns from life. So that the precepts are helpful. And once you commit yourself to a certain thing, then that is a kind of standard to go by, a straight edge that you can use. If you have no kind of standard, no precepts to use, then one tends to just wobble all over the place, following the way one feels in the moment. was easy to say, I'm fed up with sex. I'm never going to have sex ever again when you're feeling averse to it. And then when you're not, to understand these human bodies, the pain in them, the unpleasant side of our humanity, the hunger, the pain, the cold, just these simple things that we all have to endure. The fear of it, of physical pain and discomfort, disliking of being cold, the fear of being hungry, the reaction to being hungry. If you ever fasted, you begin to see how one tends to have just create patterns of, as soon as that feeling of hunger rises, to go and eat something. I was brought up in a family where whenever there was the slightest tinge of hunger, we had this refrigerator. We'd all go to the refrigerator, have something to eat. So that I never knew hunger as a child. And or it's just if a slight bit of hunger ever impinged on my consciousness, that was the sign to eat something. They're just like the Pavlovian dog, isn't it? The bell rings and you salivate. Then in the monastic life, I had to eat, you're only allowed one meal a day. And then fasting. And then sometimes even that one meal isn't very much. So you can watch because you have a standard of, say, discipline where you, instead of just eating, whenever that slight bit of hunger comes into consciousness, you suddenly watch that, the feeling of hunger, the desire, the kind of panic that comes, and the impulse to fill up, to get something to eat when that feeling of hunger arises. And you begin to let go. You begin to see you don't need to follow all that. You don't need to be a Pavlovian dog. You begin to understand how much food is necessary and how much isn't. Begin to be patient. And you have to find hunger isn't such an unpleasant feeling. It's something one can easily endure. You can endure, you can fast for long periods of time quite easily. And the physical feeling of hunger isn't all that unpleasant. It's just the emotional reaction to it. Habitual reaction to it. Sleeping. When you sleep, how much of sleep is just habit, just crashing out, annihilating yourself. And how much do you really need for the sake of refreshing the body? So just the basic things of our existence is sleeping, food, sexuality, all these things are to be considered in our meditations. And we can learn from our karmic predicament. Sickness, old age, and then the death. We begin to contemplate death. We begin to consciously bring it into consciousness and recognize that that's the inevitable end of that which is born. So that the facts of life, the very basic facts of existence, survival, now, are considered and reflected on and learned from, rather than learning about how a good woman should be, how a good man should be, and what you should be as an ideal. We have all that kind of training already, don't we? The shoulds and shouldn'ts, oughts and ought nots, musts and mustn't. Our intellect, you might think, oh, Venerable Sumedho's against intellectual things. He's anti-intellectual. People think Venerable Sumedho doesn't like books, doesn't like scholarship, against reading. On a meditation retreat, we refrain from doing that, not because it's bad, but because it's a discipline. Because reading and learning about things isn't for what we're doing at this time. We're not studying about Buddhism from the books, but actually practicing, witnessing, learning to practice, to cultivate Dhamma, to recognize the truth, to understand the forces that operate those, rather than reading about them in a book. It's like reading all about honey on the label without ever tasting it, isn't it? So much of intellectual learning is like reading labels on packages without ever opening and finding out what's inside, without ever seeing the real thing. So intellectual learning can be very useful, but it's not an end in itself. Just to spend one's time reading about Buddhism without practicing it seems to be a waste. A lot of people do that. You do get kind of maybe inspired for a while if you read a lot of books. When I first became acquainted with Buddhism, I felt very inspired by it. I could pick up books on Buddhism and go off and read them, and I just get really high. Wonderful. What a teaching. Isn't it fantastic? It's wonderful. And of course you want to go and tell everybody. Nobody else wants to listen. I mean, why does he always have to have these strange interests? Why can't he have ordinary interests like everyone else? I was in the Navy when I became interested in Buddhism, and the American sailors' interests are on a much lower level. But then after a while you get fed up with being inspired. You can only be inspired so much. You can only read inspiring things, and then you don't want to hear it anymore. You don't want to just depend on that kind of inspiration. So the practice, cultivation of the Dhamma, begin to understand it from actually tasting it, from knowing its flavor, from knowing exactly what it is, rather than just being impressed with the abstractions, with the recipe, with the label. But admittedly, there's a lot of good things that come from reading. The reading has its place, but we're learning in this, through meditation, what is appropriate to time and place. So in this meditation retreat, if you see that the conventional form, the traditional form that we use, the monastic life, the precepts, any kind of instruction, techniques, these are for reflection, for watching with, rather than ends in themselves. A way of, say, committing oneself to something to watch, rather than, maybe like you don't like the chanting. You don't like the chanting we do. I can never become a Theravada Buddhist because I can't stand the chanting. That's an opinion, isn't it? Another kind of viewpoint one takes. You can see that it's just that. You say, I hate that chanting. You can just see it in your mind. It's just something, a momentary thing, isn't it? So that even what you don't like about it is reflected on rather than believed in. We're not trying to present you with the best of everything, in the sense of some kind of absolute best. But we're providing you with something to reflect on. Some might be you might like, some you don't like, some you might agree with, some you may not agree with, but the important thing is not that everything you get here you agree with or like, but you reflect on it. To see the arising and passing of love and hate, like and dislike, happiness and suffering. Sometimes in a monastery, like Ajahn could really be quite difficult. And then you'd think, but it would certainly bring up a lot of feelings in the mind, frustration, doubt, anger, which of course was what one reflected on. One was not trying to make Ajahn Chah always be agreeable and then reject him. And I can't stand it when he's disagreeable. It's pointless, isn't it? But to reflect on the mind, because that's the way life is. Some of it's going to agree with us, some of it isn't. Life changes. Things change. And if we feel we always have to have around us that which we like and agree with, then we cannot cope, we cannot learn from the other half of existence. So our life has to be one of control and manipulation, motivated by aversion and fear. But this way you can learn from all conditions: success, failure, happiness and suffering, praise and blame. Just note in what happens when somebody praises you and when somebody criticizes you. Using life itself as a reflection. In your work, or somebody says, you're not doing this good enough, what happens to your mind? Rather than thinking that, rather than becoming terribly upset following, how dare they criticize me? Somebody says, you didn't do this right, you did it all wrong, and then you answer back, how dare you criticize me? I've seen you do worse than this. Last week you did this and it was terrible. How dare you say that I'm doing it wrong? Get into an argument and a fight. Much better to, if somebody criticizes, just watch the mind itself, the aversion, wanting to get even or point out the other person's wrong. So that life is teaching you. You can learn from the praise that you get. What happens when people praise you? You're really the best I've ever seen. Get carried away on wings. And then, hopeless. How many times have I told you and you still don't do it right? Depression or anger. You see what I mean? It's pointing to the mind itself. You're reflecting. It's not a matter of being the best or having the best of everything, the supreme vehicle or the pure one, the ultimate, the bestest, mostest, chief supremest. We could just list all the superlative superlatives in the English language and say, Venerable Sumedho teaches the ultimate, supreme, purest of all vehicle. You add a few more superlatives. What did we do? We just have another viewpoint to defend. We can also learn how, our attachment to the idea of purity, or of, there's a lot of this feeling that we have to have the best. How do you know Buddhism is the best religion? Maybe it isn't. Maybe some people say somebody's telling me the Rudolf Steiner people say it was appropriate for India 2,500 years ago, but it's not anymore. In this modern time, it's no longer appropriate. It's out of date. Sounds sensible, and it's a pretty old religion. The Baha'i, the Baha'i religion, one time one of them told me that they've been extremely tolerant, patronizing to me. They said, "Oh, Buddhism, it's a wonderful religion." Yes. I know, I've studied it, and it's a really fine religion. But of course it was appropriate for people in 2,500 years ago. But now we have Baha'u'llah, who's a modern prophet. And he's the latest of the prophets, of the great prophets. There was Buddha, and then there was Jesus, and then there was Muhammad, and now we've got Baha'u'llah. So I think, well, I want the latest prophet. Because I'm a modern person, I want a modern prophet. I don't want one of those old fuddy-duddies. I want to be with the times. A modern religion for a modern man. And books are written, titles like that, Modern Religion for Modern Man. So it all can sound very reasonable. There's different scientific kind of meditations, biofeedback and so forth. All kinds of things with modern equipment and technology to meditate with. So then doubts arise, don't they? We can think, well, which one should I choose? The supreme vehicle, the ultimate, or the pure, or the modern, the latest, the scientific? These are all, just opinions and views, aren't they? What works in a practical way? You have to choose one of them anyway, and see if they work, don't you? You have to, and then of course you choose one according to whether you have confidence in it. You think if some maybe one attracts you more than the other. There's some kind of feeling for it more than another one. From the Buddhist position, it isn't out of date. I don't see where Buddhism is something that isn't appropriate to the needs of present society, and certainly appropriate to my needs. But then it might not be for you. I don't know. It's up to you, isn't it? Find out. So we're always being thrown back onto ourselves. Begin to learn from life itself is what we're doing, aren't we? You can use these conventional forms to reflect on rather than just grasp and clutch at. And then when something else, somebody comes along and says, puts another opinion in your mind, you throw one away and grasp another. Just maybe substituting one kind of grasping for another. where when you really examine grasping, you can use old-fashioned things or modern ones, but the important thing is to see that the grasping is where we suffer. Not a matter of finding the best or the supreme, but of using properly what what is available, isn't it? You don't have to have perfect health, have a tremendously high intelligence quotient. To have a whole, have a kind of perfect physical condition and all the best of everything in order to meditate. Even if you're unhealthy, not so very intelligent, you can still meditate. If you're willing to learn from the way things are, reflect on things. You don't need to be brilliant, a kind of a genius, or a perfect physical specimen. So even, say, people with leprosy, people with horrible diseases, with all kinds of say, seeming worldly disadvantages, can still meditate. Not the criteria, is it, to have the best of everything, but to learn from the way things are, as you happen to, as they happen to arise and manifest in your life. So at this time we have this very nice place. All this is manifested in our lives. So how skillfully are you using it? And reflecting on it. Seeing what attachment is, what suffering is, the arising, the cessation, and realizing having the right attitude, the right understanding from your meditation.
Handmayam vadakata satukaram tatamase Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.